So what we're going to do in a second is, right, so you're able to see the screen now?
Yeah, I can see your screen.
That's great. So what I've done for now is basically opened up what is called
working with a multiple disciplinary team.
That is correct. So what I've done is essentially just opened up, the unit specification. And what we're going to do with this is resume recording. Right. So essentially what I've done right now is, looking at this bit in terms of the unit specification. So this is a key unit, in the health and social care sector because of the fact that, when you work within the health and social care sector, you are going to be working with a lot of different teams. In general, when I say teams, you're going to be looking at working with different departments, different types of people from different departments. And if we look at the healthcare sector in general, when we look at the National Health Service in the UK and we look at the healthcare sector in general, there are lots of different types of roles which people have. So if I talk about management roles, you'll have directors, management team, practice managers, maybe you'll have GPs who work within the surgery, you have doctors, nurses, healthcare assistant. So this is the setup which is more or less within the NHS or the healthcare sector. But when I talk about working in multidisciplinary teams, that means you are going to be working with people from other sectors as well. And that is outside the health and social care sector. So in these cases, some of these workings will primarily happen because of the fact that you're meeting with compliance. So looking at CQC in general, in some cases, it could be working with contractors, partners who provide, ancillary services to the health and social care, things like, if I give you pretty much an example of, how you would look at these workings would be, you have, say, for example, certain contractors which come in and do repairs of medical equipment or, upkeep the equipment across the year, which is used by the staff to provide care to patients within the hospitals. And that would be one such sector. So it could be working within the, working with people across the IT sector, with the trained technicians that you look at. In some cases, it could be working with contractors, which are consultants, not in the medical field, but from the non-medical field. You could be looking at working with agencies which maintain compliance or look at least laying down guidelines in this particular sector. And that is where this whole concept of multidisciplinary, team working comes in. So it's a sector which basically requires close working with different sectors.
The diversities of the sectors.
Correct. And that will allow you or as an individual, as a sector to be able to provide patient care. So this particular unit will focus on understanding what are teams, how teams are formed, why they're important, how you work within a team. And when you work within a team, sometimes you assume elementary responsibility, sometimes you have supervisory responsibility, and sometimes you have management responsibility. So we'll be looking at the various aspects of how teams and team working works within the health and social care tech sector. And that is why this is classed as, a unit which is saying working with multidisciplinary teams. Now, it's got 4 learning outcomes. One of the first learning outcome would be a basic one, which says understand how to build and maintain working relationship with other professionals and other discipline. It's got 2 assessment criteria. That is what we're going to cover in today's discussion. Then the second learning outcome focuses on how to build and lead multidisciplinary teams. So here we will look at some of the theoretical models of how team building is done, looking at the Tuckman's model, Dr. Belbin's model in terms of team roles, and then be able to do a SWOT analysis to understand how do we, rate our skills and, essentially on the basis of doing a SWOT analysis to see, okay, these are areas that I know, these are areas that I know well, and these are areas that I need training in, or these are areas which are new to me. And that is where sometimes team leaders, supervisors then look at doing this SWOT analysis to be able to put and give you roles within the team which you're able to perform, which does not put stress, obviously looks at your contribution within that particular role, and then matches it with your skills to be able to be able to lead and in some cases deliver and be a part of a team which is delivering patient care. The third one would be looking at understanding what are barriers first. What kind of barriers does team working actually bring forward? So sometimes you have individuals working in a team, and we get to hear from the supervisor or from the manager saying that I've got too many people which are hot-headed, or I've got too many people within my team who are opinionated, or I've got too many leaders in my team. And that tends to be, creating stress or, tensions in terms of the day-to-day operational and work. So we would understand what kind of barriers can come in. A simplest barrier would be a communication barrier. Sometimes information sent across by a manager does not reach or does not get translated in the same way as you would want that information to be relayed. And in that case, a communication would become a very simple barrier. So what we'll do in the third learning outcome would be to try and understand what are barriers to effective team working, and how do we overcome these barriers by looking at constant monitoring, training, development, and supervision, so that they do not end up into issues or problems which could be disastrous for a care home, for example, or for a hospital, or for a surgery, or for any kind of a setup within the health and social care sector. And the last learning outcome will focus on understanding how do we communicate with other team members from other disciplines and who are the stakeholders. So here we are going to be getting into understanding issues in terms of, firstly, we will look at types of communication can be done, and I think it is quite easily understood that we do different types of communication, things like looking at written communication, verbal communication. Sometimes it is communication through body language when you're sitting in meetings, group discussions, things like that. So the idea here would be to understand the communication models very briefly, and the other bit would be to understand how do we know who are the key stakeholders within the organization. So sometimes when you write letters or emails to your superior, how do you look at addressing them? When you write and communicate with external stakeholders, could be, say, members of the board, could be members of community, it could be the public in general, it could be departments within the government and things like that. So how would you then look at communication in a way wherein you are able to write to them appropriately? And then the idea would be to try and understand, what is important specifically when you are communicating in, multidisciplinary teams. That means when you write to stakeholders, could be government, could be partners, suppliers, contractors, different stakeholders within the organization. It could be peers, your colleagues, your superiors. And when we look at dealing with, agencies, compliance-wise, when we look at, say, for example, CQC in particular within this sector, you look at other agencies and bodies like NICE, National Institute of Excellence. You look at some of the key bodies that some of the stakeholders, like your director or maybe somebody senior in the management, would be able to communicate with the King's Fund to draw funding and things like that. So the idea there would be to broadly understand who are key stakeholders within an organization, what is their role in multidisciplinary teams, and should you wish to communicate and you need to communicate, then how would you go about communicating to these different people and different team members, within different members within your team? And then if you have to write externally, how would you then communicate to external stakeholders? Now, each of this is what we are going to look at, basically, studying with a presentation, which will be a combination of, I would say, a video, some discussions that we would do, and then, we will go through some of these slides, which will give us a bit more information in terms of how, multidisciplinary teams work, why they're important within this sector. And then we'll go through some of the bits of the indicative content, which is primarily given in the learning outcomes and the unit specification. So let me start off with, some key bits of terminology. In the learning outcome 1, we talk about, in the unit itself, we talk about MDT. This is a term which will become quite synonymous with when you look at, talking about multidisciplinary teams. So in short, MDT. Now, what is a multidisciplinary, approach? Why do we need to look at this approach? So sometimes if we have to literally define the meaning of the word multidisciplinary, we will be looking at, defining it as a combination of several disciplines or specializations which could be used to approach a problem or solve a problem or, approach a topic. So for example, when the COVID pandemic, hit us 2 years back, I think the approach on that side, which the government initially took, was to look at putting together individuals from the relevant areas who could actually approach this subject, research it, and then come up with some sort of conclusion in terms of what would be the approach the government would need to take. And that was putting together people from academic background, from the medicine background, from pathologists or people who can diagnose and do tests, looking at nurses, looking at healthcare workers, looking at data which was coming from the UN, from China, from other places. So what in effect you get to see is that the government did try to put together a team which was like the core team who would deal with the COVID situation in the UK. And this approach can be seen as a multidisciplinary approach because nobody knew what the problem was. Nobody knew what the solution was. There was no vaccine. There was no treatments available. So the idea there was to try and bring together people from different backgrounds, which have knowledge about pandemics, have knowledge about medicine, have knowledge about care, have knowledge about delivering care. And they were then put together to approach this problem and look at dealing with the pandemic. So this was an example of, say, how a multidisciplinary approach tends to work when we are faced with an issue or a particular problem. Now, if we filter it down specifically to the area of health and social care, we would be defining this as an approach wherein what we try and do is basically look at finding a treatment to a disease, to a problem. And that could involve a lot of people working together, and they would be physicians, nutritionists, psychologists. You look at trainers, gynecologists. It could be people which are doctors, nurses, healthcare workers. And that is where the multidisciplinary approach can be seen within the health and social care sector. So when let's say the vaccine for the COVID needed to be found, a lot of people who are research scientists, pathologists, you look at physicians, they all collated data together to be able to put into research and then, look at coming up with a vaccine, which took about, say 12 to 18 months for it to be tested and everything. So this is a multidisciplinary approach. Even though they've come up with the vaccine, it could not still be administered to mass population because of the fact that it had to be tested. So it went through a lot of testing on mice first, then it went to a testing in terms of after animals, mammals, it went to humans. There were people who volunteered for this particular testing. And once the results came out, the final results, across the population of 30,000 minimum before a vaccine can be commercialized, they came out as positive. And, they came out that there were not many issues, or in terms of there was no fatalities in particular. That was the key bit. Then this vaccine could be looked at mass producing. And this again is an example of how the sector has come together. And obviously a lot of different people, research scientists, people from, chemistry, people from molecular biology, looking at people which are physicians, GPs, doctors, they all came together, nurses, and that allowed this vaccine to be, produced. So this approach is what we look at applying when we talk about, the multidisciplinary approach or teams approach within the health and social care sector. Now, when we look at MD in particular, multidisciplinary, let's also look at expanding it to say what is multidisciplinary team.
This particular thing is not sending to me,
this will be available to you on Moodle. The recording will also be available to you after the session.
But the PowerPoint is not.
Yeah, it will be available. It will be available.
It will be available later.
Everything would be available, yes.
All right, go on.
So we expand this into the concept of team. Now, why we look at teams is because sometimes if the goal is greater than, something which can not be achieved by a few individuals, then obviously sometimes you have to form these teams. And specifically when we look at COVID in general, because it was something which originated from China and then it spread globally, the requirement was for different people to understand why this was spreading and things like that. So the concept of team came in. So here you are putting together like-minded individuals to work to a common objective. And that is where we see MDT being used as a term, which is people with common goals and objectives coming together to be able to work towards that particular goal. So when we look at integrated care, or when we say patient-centered care, PCA, that we normally, or approach, person-centered approach that we normally provide within this sector, and specifically within the NHS, we look at this approach being put into practice because of the formation of what are called multidisciplinary teams. So you have practitioners, you have professionals, you have people from different areas within even the health and social care sector, all coming together to be able to deliver efficient patient care. So you look at, if you understand an example of somebody who's undergoing a surgery, so has undergone some sort of an operation. After the operation has been successfully carried out by consultants and doctors, then the patient is transferred into ICU. In ICU, the care is done by obviously visits from the doctor, but obviously nurses step in and they become the major part of delivering care. And along with that, you have healthcare assistant and other workers which primarily look at providing care. So you have nurses, you have physicists, you have healthcare assistant who would then be looking at providing this care. So a patient's road to recovery tends to be dealing with different sets of people within the same team. And you have been admitted into a hospital, you had a surgery, you see this as an integrated team, wherein a hospital becomes an integrated team, and that is then, having to deliver care which is specifically tailored to meeting your requirements and you getting better soon. And that approach tends to be with the formation of, teams. Now, if we look at understanding this basic concept and look at a small video, which I want to play, essentially, and that video is going to be putting a bit of, I would say, perspective into, why do we look at multidisciplinary teams? So let's look at listening into this short video, for a couple of seconds to understand what does it mean when we say in a bit more detail, multidisciplinary teams.
Okay.
So are you able to see the screen and hear?
Yeah, I can see it is very clear and crystal.
Multidisciplinary team, or MDT for short, is simply a diverse group of professionals working together. The MDT would aim to deliver person-centered and coordinated care and support for the person with care needs. It could include a doctor, a social worker, a physiotherapist, and our staff from local authority, housing, and voluntary organisations. These professionals can work together to deliver person-centred and coordinated care and support for the person with care needs. Holistic and integrated, or to put it another way, seeing the big picture and working together for the benefit of the service user or person with care and support needs. Like anyone, they have complex lives, needs and situations. They may have many interventions in addition to having some great personal strengths. An effective MDT can bridge professional and organisational specialisms and use the best of the knowledge and skills on hand to deliver great outcomes. Who are MDTs aimed at? The simple answer is anyone who can benefit from comprehensive, continuous and seamless care. This includes adults, children, people with mental health problems and older people. While suitable for people with single conditions, evidence indicates that integrated care is especially effective for people with complex needs. Improved outcomes include treatment planning, patient experience and continuity of care. Building a successful MDT. The MDT needs to embrace some important factors to succeed in delivering good outcomes. These may include shared vision, informal opportunities to chat, trusting relationships, good professional development, and dedicated case managers. Person-centred, collaborative, and integrated. A multidisciplinary team working together can deliver excellent results for a wide range of people with diverse needs and desired outcomes. comprehensive, continuous, and seamless care can be the result.
So this gives a clear perspective in terms of, what we, what we mean by when we say multidisciplinary teams. And this is quite important within the health and social care sector, is because of the fact that, you won't be able to, provide effective patient care, whether it's a nursing home, care home, old age home, or, hospital. And that is why, this approach is an integral part of providing, care within the National Health Service and in general, now the health and social care sector. So earlier this year, the government has also, last year, they proposed that they're going to be forming a separate wing or a unit within the National Health Service to look at providing mental health care as well. And that is where this additional cess or tax on national insurance is also kicked in from April, which is adding 1.5p towards creating a fund for mental health care services, which the NHS would need to deliver. So it is a very, very important topic when we talk about multidisciplinary teams and, how they are effective in terms of delivering integrated care, specifically, to patients or people when you, say, for example, require that at some stage in your life, or obviously if you've had an accident or things like that. So you might be feeling under the weather. It could be cough and cold, and you might go into the GP, and the GP might prescribe you some, medicine, which could be, like, for example, you are affected by allergies, so they might prescribe you Peritones and things like that. But that is being just with the GP.
Can I do anything for you?
But at some stage, if you understand the process that you are undergoing some sort of a surgery or receiving treatment at the hospital, then in that case, that care expands, and that expands to basically, lots of different types of people getting involved in terms of providing that care to you. And that is where that concept of MDT can be seen.
Okay.
Now, after this, broad understanding of, the learning outcome, which is looking at the multidisciplinary team approach, why is it important within the health and social care sector, and the key terminology that we've covered, let's dive into and understand some of the assessment criteria directly related to this learning outcome. Now, the first one talks about roles and responsibilities of key professionals from other disciplines to a specific job role. Now, one of the key things that we need to understand in this is that it talks about roles and responsibilities of key professionals. So who are going to be the key professionals within this sector? Can you name a few key professionals within this sector, health and social care sector?
The key professionals?
Yes.
I think one is going to be my GP.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And the social care officer.
Yes. Yeah, yes.
And QCQ.
Yes. So compliance-wise, some agencies. So when we talk about key professionals, just look at, the slide that I put forward. So at different levels of working within the organization.
Care workers and personal assistants.
That's correct. Yeah, we will see different kinds of workers. So when we talk about different types of professionals, they will have specific job role, and they could be starting with care worker, personal assistant. It could be a worker within the community, which is providing wider services. Once you've had a bit of rehabilitation, or for example, if you are requiring physiotherapy, that those services would typically be delivered by a physiotherapist in the community. You will have, we've all heard about triage teams, when we look at nurses in particular, looking at providing maternal care and things like that during, let's say, women giving birth. So you have a team of nurses which will work together to be able to, make visits to your home, make sure that, everything is being done and all the care required is being provided along with information so that you could successfully, deliver, towards the end when it comes to an end and, you're delivering a child. So when we look at senior care workers, we look at sometimes you look at people which are affected with, say, if you've had an accident and you've had a bit of a disability and then you want to integrate back into the society, you'll have somebody who will work with you by providing physiotherapy sessions, maybe counseling. You have rehabilitation workers. You have therapists which will come in and provide therapy. So there are lots and lots of different types of professionals which work within the sector. So we know that when we talk about broad category, we say healthcare assistant or healthcare professionals, we talk about nurses, we talk about doctors and GPs. But as you can see on the slide, there are so many different types of roles that we get to see.
The management, the registered managers and the commissioners.
Correct.
That
we have. Absolutely. So dinner ladies, for example, people which cook food when you're in the hospital and you get that balanced meal, which is prepared under the supervision of a nutritionist, and dinner ladies or cooks or chefs which provide that, they are all part of the support role or the role at some stage which is being played by them in terms of providing, care. Now, in the first learning outcome, what we have to do is in the first assessment criteria, we need to be able to analyze some of these roles and responsibilities of some of these key professionals related to their job area. And before we do that, let's look at quickly understanding and, building our knowledge in terms of team and team working. So when we discussed about multidisciplinary teams, we need to also understand what is a team. Team is together we, do more. In a way, that is the acronym which basically comes across as team. So I don't know whether that's something you've come across, but together we achieve more. That is also sometimes used as a TEAM, a short acronym for team. Now, a team is a group of people essentially which are going to be brought together for a common goal and objective, for achieving a common goal and objective. And now, when we look at this from a perspective of health and social care sector, we've discussed that this could not just be a team approach, but it has to be expanded to a multidisciplinary approach, because within the health and social care sector, there are certain sectors. If we look at just, for example, outside, for example, health and social care, let's look at defense as a sector. Now, defense as a sector, which is Army, Air Force, Navy, they have a lot of different types of people or industries work with them to be able to provide things that they need. So, for example, building of ships happen in a shipyard. That is a different side of, something which the Navy does not do. They don't build ships, but obviously they're dependent on contractors and companies. So engineering side would be one. They will also be dependent on other, type of, let's say, industries which produce arms and ammunition. So when we look at this approach of multidisciplinary, you generally see a construction industry is a good example. So when you look at a company building houses, you generally see there are lots of different types of tradesmen which come together: plumber, electrician, plasterer. You look at people who work on, putting the structure together, bricklayer. There are, you have project managers, you have engineers who come and do the site survey. You have agencies which come in and deliver a lot of stuff. So again, they're building a house or building a housing development takes an approach which is a multidisciplinary approach. So this is something that we also understand, that in terms of providing social care services, or the National Health Service in particular, uses an approach which is the integrated approach of having people working from different facets of different sectors within the industry, and they come together to provide, patient-centered approach or an integrated care approach to the patient and people who need it. Now, in this approach, we also see team working. And the reason why team working happens is because of multi-agency working. So sometimes NHS would work with private partnerships or create partnerships which are going to be private sector players who would come in and help out in delivering that care. Like when you look at vaccination as a program under COVID-19, what we've seen is the government wanted to expand this program and rapidly have the vaccination done for all the population. So there was a very close working with a lot of different partners, not just the NHS, but within the NHS and outside the NHS, a lot of different agencies came together. So the vaccination centers opened up in, sports clubs or, in schools and in, places of interest, which are places where people frequent. And this was all possible because of multi-agency working. So we see the workings of teamwork happening, which is collaborative working happening between different sets of people. And that allowed the rate of uptake of vaccination to happen quite quickly within the UK. So you would see and realize that UK has the highest number of people vaccinated in any developed country. and along with UAE and one or two other countries, UK was the first one to cross a lot of milestones because of the multi-agency working, which they applied as an approach in the case of looking at vaccination. Now, the bit in terms of understanding the role that you play within the sector is important. So we are looking at roles and responsibilities. So what we need to do is, using the slide that I put together here, we need to understand where do we work within the health and social care sector? What is my role within, say, if I say I'm a care worker, or if I say I'm a nurse, or if I say I'm a part of the management, or I'm say, for example, a practice manager. What I need to be then able to do is basically understand what is my role, what are my responsibilities, and how do I play that role to be able to deliver or do my contribution in terms of delivering that care to the patient. So in this context, we will also need to understand, because we're talking about teams, we also want to understand what were the various models proposed in terms of various psychologists, which basically propose team formation, and how does that happen. So one of the models which is very widely accepted in the market and is now considered as a backbone of how team development happens in any organization was proposed by somebody called Bruce Tuckman in the 1950s, late 1950s. So he came up with this idea that the team formation goes through 4 phases, and later on he added the 5th stage, or the phase which is called adjourning. And this model is now very clearly recognized as a model for team building within the widely acceptable globally. So any organization which looks at the process of team building actually sees team building happening through these 5 phases within the organization. And he defined these stages as forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. So it's like a phase wherein, basically when we talk about the formation of a team and people are being put together in terms of, understanding that why you need to work in a team was initially proposed, by him. And he decided that, when team formation tends to happen, it tends to go through these 5 phases of development. And the forming stage basically is wherein people are put together by managers. They get to know each other. There is very little agreement on what are the aims and objectives, and everybody is trying to, focus on and trying to put their viewpoint forward. And that is why it is a forming stage. So people are getting together. So it's like an example that when COVID vaccination teams were put together, there were people being brought in from different sets of the organization. They must have not worked together. And obviously it took a bit of, time for them to kind of acclimatize and know each other and what their role is going to be. And that was the stage which is called forming. Storming is wherein people come together from different places. And then when they are put into a group or a team, they tend to have conflicts. They tend to have differences. And these differences tend to be, differences because people say, okay, hang on, why should I take this role? I have got 10 years of experience. Then somebody else says, oh, hang on, I wouldn't be happy doing this because it's too junior role for me. So those kind of differences happen, and people try and convince each other in terms of, trying to get hold of key positions or key, let's say, facets of the responsibilities within the team. And that stage wherein there are lots of these discussions, differences, brainstorming sessions, arguments is normally termed as a storming stage. Then the 3rd stage is norming. Differences go away, agreements and consensus is built up. And obviously people start accepting their roles and responsibilities basis their skill set and obviously the bits that they're interested in doing. And that stage where the team starts to now engage, the members of the team actually start to engage with each other is basically termed as the norming stage. And then after the norming, the team starts performing, which means everybody knows what they need to do. They are very clear in terms of what their objective is. They have a shared vision. They are able to understand the goals, and there are no differences in general within the group of people who are working as a team. The team then starts performing. And after the work has been done and the team has performed and has achieved the goals or the objectives which were set, at some stage, this 5th phase which was added was adjourning. That means sometimes you bring together people from different places and they form a team, form a strategic group, or maybe a project group, but once the project is accomplished or the goal has been achieved, the group gets disbanded, the team gets disbanded. And that stage where the team gets disbanded is termed as the adjourning phase. That means you go back to doing your usual functions. An example of this would be vaccination. As you know, the current minister, who's the Minister of Education, Nadeem Zahawi, was the key vaccinations minister. So he was the one who was driving the vaccination in the UK across the various age groups. So it started off with 80s, then went to 70s, 60s, 50s, 30s, and then obviously went down to 12 year and above. And he was instrumental in driving this process of vaccination to achieve these milestones which the government and the Boris's team was setting.
Yeah.
And if you see, once that has been achieved, people have had the first round of vaccination, the second round, and in some cases now the third round, this team was disbanded. So obviously, the core group went back to doing their usual work, and now he's become the education minister. And, that is basically showing an example of what is the adjourning phase. So here, in this particular task, when you do your assignment, because it talks about analyzing your roles and responsibilities, at some stage, what you'll have to do in your case would be to understand what is your role within the organization that you work, taking that as an example, then answer some of these key questions. What is your responsibility? What is sometimes you're asked to undertake on a daily basis? Who do you report to? Is there any staff which reports into you? That means are you responsible for supervision? What is your rate of pay and the hours you work? And that would help you understand your role and responsibilities within the organization. So in some cases, sometimes you look at an example of, if I work as say, for example, as a nurse within an organization, I do my shifts.
The GP is calling.
Yeah, okay.
Can I pick it?
Yeah, go for it. So in some cases, it tends to be a case wherein you are looking at making sure that
speaking to this. I'm the one that are waiting for the call.
So,
the care coordinator. Yes. Yeah. Basically, I think.
So in this case, what tends to happen is that we are going to be looking at understanding your key responsibilities, and that is what you will put forward and do in this particular task. So here we are looking at the scope of your job role. You're looking at defining in terms of what do you do if you're responsible for supervision of staff, what kind of activities you undertake. When I say supervision, it could be things like you are trying to understand about, the performance that they do, what are the day-to-day functions that they carry out, the activities they do, and obviously looking at, what kind of resources they need, and are they able to perform these to the expected, part of, their role. And that would tend to be, completing, I would say, the bits on your side. Now, the other bit which we also need to know is very clearly stakeholders. What are stakeholders? Now, if I look at talking about stakeholders and their meaning of stakeholders, what we want to be able to do is understand that stakeholders are people who have an interest or have a concern in something. That means in the health and social care sector, you'll have a lot of stakeholders. When we talk about stakeholders here, we talk about stakeholders which are primarily on the side of the compliance side of things. So when you look at CQC, you look at the Nutfields Trust, you look at NICE, NICE, you look at some of the agencies which are involved in terms of providing and maintaining that these standards are kept. They would be people who would be termed as stakeholders. Government is a stakeholder. The compliance agencies are a stakeholder, and that is what we need to understand, that they help in upkeeping the standards to which the when I say standards, that means quality of care which is required to be delivered to patients within this sector. And that is something that we will need to look at. So when we talk about compliance, when we talk about quality, quality in terms of making sure the deliverables which the care home, for example, or the whichever setup it is required to maintain is being done to that standard, they would then be inspected, talked about, and obviously when you do the inspection of it, once the inspection goes through, you get a bit of a rating, and they are the people who would be looking at, being termed as stakeholders. So in the first part of your assessment criteria, that is what we are going to look at doing. And that would be, basically understanding the roles and responsibilities required to, essentially understand with a specific role in mind for the assessment criteria, 1.1. Now, in the assessment criteria 1.2, what we are looking at primarily is understanding the bits which is to look at what are your skills and techniques and what is required to build a successful, cross, let's say, disciplinary working team. So when we talk about these cross-disciplinary working teams, we are going to be looking at understanding what is the collaboration that is required to be done across different forms, different team members in different setup to be able to provide the integrated care required, for patients. So from our perspective, when we talk about, skills and techniques here, what we want to be able to do is talk about, skills which are required for you to be able to work within the team. And these skills could be skills like communication skills, it could be IT skills, it could be, the person-centered approach that we look at the 6 C's of person-centered approach. We talk about, you have to be, for example, if you're a good communication, when we just talk about communication for a start, we're looking at communication wherein you are going to be a patient listener. You should be able to empathize with your patient. You should be excluding positivity in terms of your, work, or bringing a positive attitude, towards work. Wherein sometimes, even though, you're not been dealt with, or for example have not been given, or you've been dealt the wrong hand, you still show positivity in the way you work and meet challenges or problems. And that are major things that we look at when we talk about skills and techniques in terms of how you want to build a team. So in some cases, when we talk about building this team, we are looking at building this team which basically understands client confidentiality, patient care. They understand that the work being given is critical, and if they are not able to meet the standards required to be able to deliver that work, that could mean that it could be in some cases fatal, because you're dealing with patient care, and in some cases it could not lead to having the result which is required. And that is where leaders or managers within this sector look at understanding the skills, the experience that you have in the roles that you've previously worked in, before they put you in teams to be able to teach and say, for example, deliver care. In my case, as a teacher, when I talk about, I'd be looking at probably getting hold of people who can be a part of my team, wherein they have been previously teaching within the sector. In higher education, they have academic knowledge, they have vocational skills and a number of years of experience, which would give me confidence to put them or include them in our team. And that is where, that would then tend to kind of work. Now, what I want to do essentially is, there is one particular article that I want everyone to read, because that would be helpful to try and understand how do we look at building a cross multidisciplinary team, and what is involved in terms of this particular work. Now, in order to do this, what I would do is, and I would suggest, there's an article that I would ask everyone to go ahead and read. And this article is what I'm going to bring up now onto your screen. And I would suggest that reading this particular article would essentially be giving you a detailed background in terms of what are the skills and techniques required to build a successful multidisciplinary team. So this is a good reading for about 10 minutes. It's a 10 minutes read, this particular article, which was published in September 2018, and is specifically related to the health and social care sector, the National Health Service, and is directly, something, it's not generic, it's directly related to the unit. And this is what I would suggest that you'd need to read through to be able to cover this particular task, 1.2, which is analyze skills and techniques required to build cross-disciplinary or, multidisciplinary teams. The other bit that I'm going to do is also for the purposes of understanding team building as a concept. If I quickly share this with you, is another, article which I will put forward on Moodle, and that will be the Tuckman's model of team building. It's a handout which would cover the team building model of Bruce Tuckman, which is what he proposed in the late 1960s, which goes through the formation of 5 stages. And this handout would give you a bit of know-how, and obviously, more details about some additional reading to, complement your knowledge on the assessment criteria 1.1. So I hope in this particular session, you've understood the key bits in terms of how to build and maintain, working relationship with professionals in other discipline. And we've made a start, in terms of covering some of the indicative content on learning outcome 1. And what we're going to do in the next lecture is going to be looking at focusing on understanding, the learning outcome 2. And that would be going into a bit more detail of understanding the strengths and weaknesses and how multidisciplinary teams actually achieve the goals and objectives which have been set by the management. So I'll see you in the next session. A copy of this recording, the presentation, the handouts which I've shown, and the article would be available on Moodle just after the session in a couple of minutes. And should you have any questions, feel free to drop them over to me on my email address, which is raman@ukversity.co.uk. And I will see you in the next session. Thanks for joining, and bye for now.